point of obsession, because making things, whether it's visual art or textiles or writing, is one of the most important things in my life. It makes me very happy. I feel like myself. So I was really excited when Anne Tannam agreed to do a pod chat, because not only is she a fabulous poet, but she also coaches people to harness their own creativity in business and work and life. So she can do it herself, and, which is fabulous for us, she can tell us how to do it too, or actually give us ways of finding out how to be more creative in our own way for ourselves. It took Anne about 40 years to start writing, and I am so glad she did. She's the author of 2 wonderful poetry collections, with a third, 26 Letters of a New Alphabet, coming soon from Salmon Poetry later this year. So whether you feel you have zero creativity, or whether you're an established artist, whatever sorts of things you're interested in making or writing, this episode will improve your creativity and give you more joy. Thank you, Anne, so much for agreeing to chat with me today. And as I was just saying, it's all about me, because we're going to be talking about writing and creativity. And I brought all my real life hot questions for you to solve. But I am assuming that my questions are pretty much universal.
Yeah, I mean, of course, everybody has their own way of asking questions and reasons, but certainly the same questions come up again and again when people are either stuck or perhaps, need a little unblocking in their creative process. There's a universality to all of us when it comes to the process.
Okay, so I'm just going to go for it. Having started like that, right. Okay, so how do we, aka me? No, I can't. I can't make this into free coaching. Okay, so what I notice is that myself, along with lots of other people, we get really scared. These internal voices, the critics that got stuck into our systems as young people, come and plague us in our own particular flavour, that you can't do it, or you're not the sort of person who, or you will fail, or people will laugh at you. Whatever our particular flavour is, comes as soon as we pick up a paintbrush or a pen, or even think about it, these thoughts come into our minds. So how, in the real world, how do we deal with these fears and inner critics?
So the famous inner critic. So in my own writing, I didn't really understand who the inner critic was until several years later, and did some reading around what's called family therapy systems, and the realization that your inner critic is an aspect of you, but it is very much kind of part of a system that's designed to protect you. And so the inner critic, no matter what they're saying, if we remember that their role is to protect us, we can then begin to have a conversation with that inner critic, asking what it is that they're trying to protect us from. And as you said earlier, Kate, that inner critic, that voice comes from when we were quite young. It's very much laid down early in our lives. So remembering that the inner critic is very much a small child, and they're often very scared. So if you hear the voice, whether it's angry, whether it's sneering, whatever, behind it, recognizing that its function is to protect us. And often that voice is telling us that it's afraid of something. So as adults who care deeply about ourselves and care very deeply about our writing or our creative process, whatever our creativity is, we do have some work to do around getting to know our inner voice, our inner critic. What are they trying to protect us from? And how can we relate to it in a way that says, I hear what you're saying, I understand, thank you very much, I really appreciate what you're doing, but I've got it. I can take it from here. You know, if I put my work out there and it's rejected, that's okay. We have resilience. If we put our work out there and again it's rejected, well then we can look and see what we can do, how we can improve, and we're always working on our craft, and you know, all of that reassuring adult voice that we can use on ourselves, Kate. And certainly in my own experience and the experience of many people that I work with, once they understand what the inner critic is trying to do, the relationship changes, the dynamic changes. Not overnight, of course. It's like every relationship, it takes time. But they're playing a very important role, and we need to appreciate and thank them for that.
So sometimes we need, when we feel the fear, the voices, or however it shows up, because it can show up as resistance or procrastination. It can show up in all sorts of subtle ways, right? It's not always, kind of big teacher hierarchical voice in our heads.
No.
Sometimes we need to give time to understand and deepen our relationship. And sometimes it works much better just to slam the door on them and tell them to go away. So how can we hone our skills at finding the best ways different ways to deal with these situations?
I think, again, if we go back to this relationship piece, and remember that voice is part of who you are, is an aspect of yourself. So that always recognizing that you to slam the door in the face of that in that moment may give you that's great, and get on with it, but they're likely to come back at times even more demanding and more because they're asking to be heard. So I mean 100% agree that, as you know, as a practitioner, there are times where we have to say firmly, I need to get on with this, and then whatever we need to do in order to quieten that voice in that moment. But this is very, very much my own sense of it is that shouting at it or being aggressive or effectively we're doing that to ourselves. So it's about how do we have a firm but loving relationship with that aspect of ourselves that we recognize began when we were children. So it's very childlike in how it copes and survives in the world. Now, I'm not, I'm not a psychologist or I think his name is Dr. Richard Schwartzman, family therapy systems. It's absolutely fascinating, but it's being able to integrate all of those aspects of ourselves in a healthy way.
And before 7 years previously, before that, you had this piece of theory that was so useful for you. What did you do with your critics?
I think, Kate, because I didn't start writing till I turned 40. So in a lot of ways, my critic, or that voice that said you're not good enough, or who are you to think that you could write, I listened faithfully to that voice and was guided by it for nearly all of my adult life. And so there was something about, I needed to get to a point in my own kind of life cycle that I was ready to take on that, I was ready to be able to listen to that voice and still do it. The cliche, you feel the fear and you do it anyway. So even though the voice was certainly coming up and she was quite, at times, quite scathing, there was something in me that was just insisted on moving forward. And maybe again, because I'd waited so long, You know, I just, you know, so there was maybe a very strong part of me that said, well, if not now, when? And, you know, time is moving on. So I think it was a timing piece that voice didn't derail me. Now, it may also have, it certainly derailed me when I was pulling together my first and my second collection, where I was looking to present it in a way that said, here's my work, I really value it, I believe that there's a cohesive collection here. I found myself writing a cover letter, for example, to one publisher, which was almost like grovel, and a really good young friend of mine, a bit like you're talking about your peers, a wonderful young friend, Alvi, you know, we were part of that kind of support group. I showed her the cover letter and she was like, get out, get out there. She booted me around and said, get in there and, you know, tell them what you're really at. So having that support played a big role in allowing me to say, yes, if I don't sound like I believe in what I'm doing and I believe in what my writing is, I'm not going to convince anybody.
I've had that experience as well. I've been on the receiving end of the sharp boot of Uma Dinsmore-Tooley, who in no uncertain terms told me that what I had written was good enough and I didn't have to make myself small. Yeah. Very sweary, and it woke me up. You know, I was literally woken up to, okay, I have to own this. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, and that's it, and that's why it is so fantastic to have our band, our tribe around us of support. And I think particularly as women, when it comes to us using our voice and speaking and saying what we want to say, we haven't been good at it. So it's really powerful to have other women and like-minded men, of course, who are rooting for us and we're rooting for them.
So do you think there is something gendered about women finding it hard? I mean, you know, this is necessarily a generalization. Is it harder in general for women to allow their creative self-expression to be heard than men?
Oh yeah.
Would you like to speak to that?
Oh, without a doubt. I think that women are often, say, for example, with writing, are regularly writing, and they're the ones that turn up more to workshops. I mean, I don't know what it's like here in the UK, but certainly in Ireland, your average creative writing workshop may have 10 women and 2 men, or, you know, it's quite stark how the gender difference. So there are many, many women writing, and yet up to recently, so few were being published. And so few were even submitting to being published. So there's no doubt there was an absolute gender bias in Irish publishing, and I think across the world publishing towards men. So many editors were men. So, you know, it was just across the board. So there's a huge responsibility there to for women's voices to be heard. But we also, as women, have a responsibility ourselves to both put ourselves forward and put each other forward. And I think that's where the support and the peer, that having our tribe is so important.
So why do you think this is? I mean, that might sound like, you know, there are many obvious answers that you could give, but, you know, are we post Me Too, or are we Me Too still? I don't know, but, you know, to all superficially, it would appear that women's voices are increasingly heard, and yet somehow still there's this reticence. What's going on here?
Well, change comes slowly. So even though I think, you know, and many of the young women and the diverse voices across the board, whether it's LGBT or, you know, any diversity are really starting to come through now, and it's really, really powerful. It makes for such a rich range of voices. But the reality is that even now, there are so many subliminal messages being given, you know, even at every stage, Kate, which is, you know, women's voices, for example, if the word shrill is never used in relation to a man's voice. So I think the reality is until we can glance at, any competition, glance at, as we're reading the newspaper, and see in the most obvious way a huge mix of voices, and because women make up certainly I think more than half the world's population, that at least half of those voices are women's voices. I think until that becomes the norm, we are still getting the message, which is your voice doesn't matter quite as much, and what you want to write about and the way in which you write doesn't matter quite as much, because the norm, as was what was seen as normal or standard, we now realize was male, and in most cases it was white male, and in most cases it was white male from quite kind of middle class backgrounds, and straight, of course.
Yeah, and white.
Oh yeah, very white.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So it seems to me, from my experience and what you're saying, that one of the easiest things that we can do is get together and encourage each other and just build that kind of support, whether it's, within a class or informally, just say, yeah. And just also keep doing it,
Yeah.
Something about the commitment to self, whether you're for your creative practice, to commit to keep on doing it. No matter what.
No matter what. So to your first point, to gather together and support each other in whatever way that looks. Oh, absolutely. Having a tribe, having a community around you that both support you and you support them. I mean, it's just incredibly powerful. And we know that in every aspect of our lives, but in terms of creativity, incredibly powerful. And the second point that you made is turn up no matter what. And I mentioned earlier that it took me 40 years to start writing. And in fact, how it happened was a very good friend of mine, Jennifer, she had been doing a life coaching diploma, which I subsequently did. And she asked me to be her guinea pig when she had to do pro bono for her training. And during those sessions, this realization of how much I really wanted to write and how much I was holding myself back. So I committed for 1 year to turn up for an hour every day and write.
Wow, that's a big commitment.
Yeah, but the time was right. And so for a whole year, every single day before work, I wrote for an hour. And so I had 364, was it 64 days, hours of writing, where I was doing it, nobody else was, this particular friend was looking at my work, but nobody else was looking at my work. And so I had the opportunity to get to know my own voice, to kind of see it growing in confidence. And so she was, and another lovely friend as well, Frank, between them, they were the support that I needed in that first year. And then I was ready to go out and, to go out and share it in a wider way. So what I would say is that, recognizing that, particularly if you're quite nervous about writing and your confidence is low, choose very carefully the people you allow have eyes on your work, particularly in the early days when you're only developing your craft. And choose them carefully and wisely.
Yes, you need a sort of, and as much as the inner critic shows up, you need all the other people, like the kind of caring mother or the caring best friend, to really come in and advise about how to manage yourself.
And being careful that if you do choose somebody that looks at your work, that they are, that they are not going to in any way impose their view of what is good or not on your work. There is a point when you get confident and much clearer about your own voice, you can then, I think your you have that robust kind of confidence that comes with that, so that when you do get criticism, and of course we all get criticism at every stage, and feedback, that you're able to, you're able to take it in. Okay, ooh, that wasn't great to hear. Okay, what's useful to me? What will I leave behind, and what's useful for me to take with me? So so I think that the stage that we're at in our process, Kate, different. It's a bit like in kind of business, they talk about teams, they talk about, forming and norming and storming. And, it's very much the same with our own creative process. Depending on where we are in the journey, different support is needed, and different resources are needed for us.
So just to broaden the conversation now, we started and really narrowed, didn't we? with my how do I manage my fear? To broaden it out again, into the kind of role that creativity plays in helping us be vital and alive and unstuck.
Because you have a it's not counselling, is it? It's
coaching, yeah.
Coaching practice, and you help people through transitions, and help people to work in teams and stuff. What role does creativity play in this wider picture of our lives?
When you think, I think it was Einstein who said, creativity is intelligence having fun. And, our creativity, Kate, is our innate, I believe, it's our deepest relationship with ourselves, our creative expression, our ability to see beyond what is to what might be. I mean, it's the greatest gift of our species. I mean, our world as we know it, for good or bad, has been built on our ability to imagine. There's a great book, Homo Sapiens. Can't remember I'm looking over here at my bookshelves. Homo Sapiens. Somebody Harris. I can't remember what his first name is. And they were talking about the hypothesis of what made Homo sapiens so powerful, so powerful and at the top of the food chain, which is not the right place for us at all, but unfortunately that's where we are at the moment. And they reckon that up to about 150 people, a tribe of about 150 people, can go about their business and be a tribe and manage. But once you get beyond that number, you need something to hold them together. You need something cohesive that will allow them to see themselves as a unit beyond just, beyond a kind of a group of people together. And that is a myth or a story to hold a people together. And whether that story is a nationalist story or whether it's a story of religion, that pulls the people together. And so it was our creative ability to imagine is what allowed us as a species to create a global group of people called humans. Yeah. So our creativity is such an essential part of what it means to be human. And if our creativity is blocked or stuck in any way, it has massive impacts on the rest of our lives.
So what are the requirements, do you think, for our creativity to flow? What do we need in our lives? What are the ingredients that need to be there to enable this flow?
Well, we need to look to young children for the answer to that, and not even young children, any children. And it was Jung who spent every afternoon out in his garden, effectively playing to go back in to do the work. And there was a quote when I was teaching. I have a teaching background, and one of the great quotes was, that play is the serious business of childhood.
What was he playing at?
Oh, he was just pottering around the garden, and he was just giving himself, when say playing, no agenda, nothing. He was, I just Was he playing
Oh,
football?
Monopoly? What's he up to?
He may have been, but he went out into the garden. So it wasn't to do gardening, it was simply to be curious and open. So one of the requirements is that we have no agenda,
Yeah,
except to play.
Mm.
And that curiosity that children have, that we often lose as adults, that the sheer joy in curiosity. And the next one is, and this is why so many of us are stuck or are blocked, is we have to risk making mistakes. We've got to be able to make mistakes over and over and over again to get better and to learn. And very young, many of us were given the message that it wasn't okay to make a mistake.
Mm.
And many of us were given the message in school that, to be good at art meant keeping within the lines. So, the requirement of being free to take risks, make mistakes, get it wrong, start again. You have to have that curiosity, that no agenda. And there has to be time. You mentioned that there has to be time put aside for it, because, and whether that's you're a CEO of a company, Kate, and you have incredibly difficult job to do. If you don't take some time to simply allow your mind to daydream, to play, when I say play, but play mental games, to give yourself space where you can make mistakes, then the kind of innovative thinking, the creative problem solving is very difficult for us if we're kind of constraining ourselves to, we've got to get this right. And there's only one way to do this.
Yeah, I can't breathe when you say that.
Yeah.
I can feel the constriction and the panic set in just hearing it.
Exactly.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great shopping list.
Yeah, I'm sure there's more, but start with those. Giving yourself time, stay open and curious. Have no agenda.
No agenda. Yeah, I think that first one for me is really important. Not having goals, so that it's my attention is focused on the pleasure of the process, or even when it's not fun, the texture of the process.
Texture of the process, absolutely.
And that's when magic happens.
That's when magic happens.
When I have a goal, I might achieve it, but there's a lack of vitality.
Yes. Early on in my own process, and I'm not too sure where this came from, it may have come from my head, but I have no doubt that there were many other examples of it out in the world. I realized that there were two different types of energy that were needed, Kate. And one I call the creator, and the other I call the caretaker. And so the creator needed those, that hour to simply turn up and play and be curious about where the language brought her and all of that, no agenda. And then the caretaker, after a period, her job was to say, "Ooh, that's great. Now, what might we do with this?"
Okay, that's interesting.
So they're two very different roles. The creator is always in the driving seat. The creator is the mistress. The creator is the mistress, and the caretaker is the servant in this relationship. If it flips the other way, if the caretaker is the one who's in control, who says you must write this and you must try and get it published here and you must do this, and the caretaker is working on behalf of, or the creator is working on behalf of the caretaker, creativity just shrivels up. So once we remember that the most important aspect is the creator, and it's the primary role, and that secondary role then is the caretaker. And very important role. Caretakers are very important people.
Well, the caretaker, it sounds like they have a role of like being an intermediary. Do you think? Is it like with the outside kind of mediates between the
that's right,
the process world of the interior creativity, and then that world and
Yeah.
kind of like a bridge.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and that's great. So that intermediary is both helping the creator, you know, and deciding what comes from the creator, but also is very clear about. I mean, I call it the caretaker. I know a client who the gatekeeper makes more sense to them as the role. So whatever that role makes sense to you, but there is certainly an aspect of it that protects the creator from the you know, the pressures and in the same way that we would protect a child out playing and doing what they need to do as children.
Yeah, absolutely. And bringing it into real concrete world, I mean, I am bowing in awe at your hour a day. Like, whoa!
That was the first year. And there were many times of, you know, because particularly at the beginning of the relationship, there was just such excitement. So what I would say, and it's now nearly 14 years later, is that I don't write every day. And I know for some people do write. I write regularly, and I've always been true to the relationship. So even if there are periods of time when I'm not actually writing, I'm doing other writing related activities that are feeding me and nurturing that creativity. So I read poetry all the time. I mean, I've been reading for many years, nearly all my life, but you know, I'm reading poetry all the time. I'm involved in I'm following my curiosity. I'm reading up on things. I'm, you know, giving myself that freedom in my mind to play with ideas, so that when I do turn up at the page, I'm kind of fresh and ready.
Yeah, resourced.
I'm resourced, exactly.
So for somebody kind of hovering around and they kind of feel that internal pressure to get something out, sort of hovering around, hopping from foot to foot, not quite able to commit, how do we make the time, given that life is full, particularly at the moment? Our lives are sort of, if you live with other people, then there's a lot of demands on our time. How do we get to the point where we can commit to giving ourselves time to fail and explore and be curious and not have a goal?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question, isn't it? Because when we do feel stressed and pressurized with work and family, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and you know, we need a haircut. What do we? So it's kind of it's almost it almost feels counterproductive to try and fit in time, because that just feels like more pressure.
Yeah, is that another thing on the to-do list? And you know,
Another thing to do.
I have to have fabulous sex. I have to do the homeschooling.
Yes,
get some
exactly.
exercise, maintain blah blah. Oh yes, and I have to be creative as well.
Have to be creative. So, you know, the first thing I would I would say is just give yourself a moment to kind of to settle into that question of, why does it feel important for me to, in this case, to write? And just sit with that question, and even ask where does that question sit in my body? And for most people, you know, when that question is asked, there's almost an ache in them. There's an ache, you know. Sometimes people feel it, you know, when I think of it, it's probably here in my chest. For some other people, it's in their stomach or in their gut. So if you feel a deep need to write, even if your life is chock-a-block with other things. So if you realize this is something that's really important to me, and sit with that for a moment, and you say, okay, how how can I honor that? How can I honor this part of me that wants so desperately to write, given how busy I am and how maybe even how overwhelmed I am? So the next question that you ask yourself is, what feels possible? Where may there be even small pockets in my day or week where I can honestly say, maybe I'm wasting a bit of time there. So you might realize, here, pure example here, you might say, do you know, I do find I'm absolutely, by nighttime I'm wrecked, and 8 o'clock I'm sitting down and I'm watching Netflix for an hour, just say, for example. And you might say, okay, so nighttime isn't the right time for me because my brain isn't in its right place. So what is the time where I'm most likely to have a little bit of energy? And if you're a morning person like I am, somebody else might be a night owl. Somebody else might say, actually, 10 o'clock, I get that little burst of energy before I go to bed. Or somebody else might say, maybe when I get up in the morning. So it might be, you say, well, for 20 minutes before I go to bed, if I'm a night owl, or 20 minutes, what feels possible? And somebody else might say, 20 minutes, I couldn't even contemplate that. And 10 minutes. And it doesn't have to be every day. You might say, what feels possible? 15 minutes, 3 times a week feels possible. You know, how's your body? How does that sit in your body? Yeah, okay, that feels possible. Then you try that for you try that for the week and see how that feels.
And if you're in any doubt, my phone has a little thing that tells me how long I've been on my phone every week.
There you go. So you're finding pockets
mortifying. It's mortifying.
You might discover, actually, I'm on social media for 3 hours a week.
Yeah.
You know, and you ask yourself, is that more important than wanting to turn up? And then the second thing is, and I'm conscious of time here, Duncan. The second thing, Kate, is that sometimes to actually physically turn up and write feels too much. It just feels too much. So I would say, give yourself 10, 15 minutes, to turn up to play. And whatever that means to you. It could be, I'll do morning pages. Some people love the morning pages. Other people, it might be, I will read read a poem or two. Or somebody else might say, actually, you know what, I just need to clear my head. So, I'm going to go for a walk, but with the intention of just noticing what's going on for me, not just going for kind of a mindless must have a walk. And that is part of your creative practice.
Because we have to fill up, right? We have to be resourced in order.
We have to be resourced. We've got to fill up. So,
but if we wait until we're not stressed before we start, it's never going to happen. It can easily be
exactly. So we fill up in whatever way is possible, and I would say, as much as we can, put pen to paper, or it can be gobbledygook. It doesn't matter. That great thing of aim low, so you're not putting yourself under any pressure, but you're beginning to feel something of the flow. You're beginning to feel a little bit more fluid in your creative movement.
And what about for people who feel the drive to do something but don't know what it is?
Play. So experiment with what that might be. So try this and see how that is, and try try something else. And so people sometimes can say, oh, I don't know whether it should be in the writing context. I don't know whether it should be the short story or the novel, and often if you dig around that, is somewhere in the back of their minds, somebody has said to them, oh, if you want to call yourself a writer, you need to, it needs to be a novel. Or, if you want to be an artist, it has to be oil. So often you say, somewhere in there is this belief that in order to be a writer or a painter or whatever, I need to do it in this way. So ask, well, what's coming organically for you?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of links me into the other big another big question, which is about how our work is valued. in society, and particularly financially, because making little pixies out of wool and acorns is not, you don't go and see that in the National Gallery. You don't see that in the National Gallery. You see pictures of oils, which are the valuable, important stuff. So when you've tootled along a bit, and you're brave enough to call yourself an artist or a writer, or maybe not, and your work and your your mediator, what did you call your mediator?
Caretaker.
Your caretaker is sort of very gently and mindfully allowing your work out into the wider world in a safe and appropriate manner. And then you meet this thing where about financial value and how our inner work, our creative work, which is precious and holy,
Yeah.
doesn't meet with the outside world's value system.
Yeah.
And that is endlessly conflicted and excruciating.
It's endlessly so, and I know that Elizabeth Gilbert, in her book Big Magic, which is all about creativity, and it's a great read in terms of just really exploring what it means. Our innate desire to be creative and you know, in what it's our superpower. It's our superpower as a species. In the same way that when we go out to play, they're you know, play is that serious business of childhood that subsequently helps us to do all the adult things. But play itself has an inherent value, and we can argue that and rightly so, that as a society we don't value creativity in the way that we need to, and we can very strongly argue that fashion is what dictates what art sells and all of that. So all of that is true. But as a creative, we have to first put a value on what it is that we're doing for ourselves.
Well, can I just say, and every human is creative?
Oh, that's just a given.
Yeah, I know, but I just want to say that out there so that, and if anybody is listening and feels that this is about a creative person, and that means you.
It's our superpower as a species, and every single one of us is born with it. So what I'm saying is that if we're waiting for society to say your work is good enough, and so you can keep doing it, then that might happen. It may not happen. Our power comes from, no matter what anybody else says, if our creativity is important to us, then that's what we do. And if we begin to ask it to have a financial, you know, to begin to pay for itself, that's a whole other question. And I'm not saying, of course, that that isn't something that you might decide to do. But if the only value that we're putting on our creativity is based on its financial or what's appeared to say its cultural worth, or, you know, then we are denying that essential part of what it means to be human, which is to create, to be creative. And that is, I'm talking about scientists, creative thinking, and, you know, I'm not just talking about an actual creative practice. So it's something very different. So look at it in my case, for example, my writing comes out in poetry. And, you know, I've written other stuff, but poetry is where my voice lies. Now, there's no planet in the universe at the moment where you could make a very good living from being a poet. And for me to put pressure on my craft to be that which makes my living would make my life very difficult. And it would make it very difficult for my art. So I've chosen, and it's a purely personal thing, you know, is that to give myself the freedom to write and to create poetry, I also have to be supporting myself in a way that is true to me. And I love it. I absolutely, because coaching is one of the most creative processes ever. but I don't put the pressure on my poetry
Yeah.
to earn me a living in the way that I by necessity put the pressure on my business to earn me my living. So they can and they nurture each other back and forth. Like it's lovely the way they chat to each other, but it would be very unfair of me to say to my poetry, poetry, you need to put food on the table.
Here we go. Oh, help me.
Now, of course,
I'm being your poetry.
no, absolutely. But the caretaker also does have, I believe, has a role in, on behalf of all creativity to make sure that it's valued in society in a real way, and that that poets are given the kind of support, because poetry, let's look at it, at an inauguration, it's the poetry often that really touches people's hearts. What was that beautiful young American poet who spoke at Joe Biden's inauguration? Amanda, I can't remember her second name, but I mean, her words were just filled the space.
And as you said earlier in our conversation, it's the glue that binds us together. It's like it's a web that binds the community together.
Exactly. It gives us meaning. It gives us meaning.
So if, for people listening, can you give us
just one thing to do to nourish our creative lives?
One thing to do to nourish your creative life is to give yourself permission to be foolish and silly and not adult-like.
I'm winning then.
Kate says, I'm ahead. One thing our creativity, one that requirements is that we don't judge it. We give it that loving, unconditional, it's my child, the most amazing child in the world support. So I think that one thing you can do for your creativity is to allow it in whatever way feels right for it now to go and play. And I'm particularly thinking of, and again, many men as well, but I'm particularly thinking of all the women who are feeling under such pressure at the moment with the pandemic, that they're trying to juggle, working from home, childcare, often elder care, and are really feeling bogged down. And so I would say the first step towards really entering into a creative life is give yourself small amounts of time to play. Whatever that feels like for you, is that could be just going for a little walk. It might even be where, I feel like baking, or I feel like doing a crossword. It doesn't matter what it is, but allow yourself to follow your curiosity and play. And then things begin to bubble. The old, wouldn't be mad if, people, I love when people say, this sounds silly, but I'm thinking, great, something's coming. Something's coming over the horizon.
Yeah, because I think something that was a massive shift for me was understanding that it's not something I have to do to be creative. It's something that I have to allow, that I kind of have to step back out of my own way.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, the reality is, and Brené Brown, the wonderful Brené Brown, has done on the phenomenal work she's done in the field of shame and vulnerability, is that the data shows that for many of us, some of the first times we felt shame was around our creativity. Don't why are you doing that? Don't be doing that. That's, that's silly. That's all of those things that we very early internalize, and our school system very, very, very quickly helps us to internalize it as well. So there we go.
Thank you so much, Anne. You have given us so much juice and so much great advice to nourish our lives and have our creative lives being more juicy.
Well, thanks, Kate. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. But I suppose, because it has made such a difference to my life, and the joy that it brings, the absolute joy that it brings, and that joy, turns up in the most unexpected places. But it begins with creativity. So it's a real pleasure and a privilege in any way to kind of to pass on what's been given to me and share it.
Thank you so much.
Not at all. Thanks, Kate.
I love that Anne was so encouraging and helpful and, really practical about how to develop our creativity. I think I'm off to play in the garden now, just like Carl Jung. But before I do that, before I scoot off, you can find Anne's coaching website at www.creativecoaching.ie and her beautiful poetry at Anne, that's Anne, Tannam, Tann, for Nelly, AM for mother, poetry.ie. And if you fancy joining the conversation about creative process, you can find me over at Instagram at Kate_Codrington, and I'd love to hear what helps your creativity to blossom. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the fascinating episodes I have coming up for you. We've got letting go, we've got activism in menopause, we've got the subtle hell of perfectionism and how to avoid it. We've got grief, sex, fascia, and much more, helping you to make your inner life a fantastic place to hang out.